My start in the business occurred around 1961, 62. I was doing court shows, afternoon court shows, playing juvenile delinquents. I played a lot of juvenile delinquents. Science fiction happened to me. I didn't in any way seek it out. And it really began with Star Trek. I hadn't had any exposure in that particular arena prior to Star Trek. You know, it's what happens to actors, in fact, to people who are generally involved in the industry and become identified with a particular project or genre, is that it either works for them or it works against them. And generally speaking, it's something that occurs on both sides. On the one hand, being involved with Star Trek as an actor, I think was somewhat limiting in terms of my availability for other parts, in terms of the perspective the industry had of me, you know. On the other hand, when that didn't eventuate, when those other roles didn't occur outside of the genre, they did to some degree within the realm of science fiction. So I was able, I guess, to capitalize on my association with Star Trek to the degree that I did other things that were identifiable with science fiction. David Gerald, who is was the editor, the story editor on Land of the Lost, called me and asked me and invited me to participate, to write an episode. I had written an episode of the animated Star Trek, and I think it was probably from that sample that he brought me in to write for Land of the Lost. I believe that's the way it went. Of course, I knew David from the old Star Trek days when he was a story editor on Star Trek, and of course wrote Trouble with Tribbles. As I was watching the episode again, refamiliarizing myself with it, I realized that the approach that I've taken in many instances with writing is to impart a message, and sometimes that can be very talky and that can be kind of verbose, and I'm not sure it's always totally actable. I remember thinking 22 minutes of story. All I have to do was 22 or 24 minutes of story. I don't know. I remember in those days exactly how much it was. And if I were to do a simple plot, I felt despair at the prospect, because I don't know how to fill up 22 minutes with action without just being totally redundant. I didn't know how to keep the story evolving. But if I had some kind of a statement, some kind of commentary that I wanted to make, then I could probably do justice to the time involved, if not the product itself. Good or bad, it had to be fun to write. And a story. I stopped writing for television because I was writing things and I was being paid for them and I was getting credit for them, and they didn't bear any resemblance. That the final product bore no resemblance to what I had written. So when it ceased being an enjoyable experience, I stopped doing it. I had an idea, you know, about who this guy Koenig was, and the little twist in the story that these were not his ancestors, but the people who followed him, and they had mucked things up pretty badly. And so you know, I thought that was kind of an interesting idea to write about. But as I say, it did seem to me that it was pretty talky. I grew up on in the 40s and Golden Age comic books, and there was a comic book called Planet Comics, which is science fiction comics. And the big deal in Planet comic books was to have the characters talk backwards. So you had to hold it up to a mirror or just painstakingly read each word. So that has always been like the easiest way to when you're creating an alien, to name him by saying by writing a name backwards. I did that in the Star Trek episode. I had a Retlaw plant, which was Walter backwards, and I was paying homage to Gene Roddenberry with the character of Koenig, which was originally E-N-E-G, which is G-E-N-E. And David said he thought it would be too obvious or something, so he changed it to Enoch with a K. But that's the origin of that particular name. There are a lot of folks out there who are fans of Land of the Lost. I'm sure that there wouldn't be this DVD campaign if there weren't. So I've gotten a generally positive reaction when they recognize the fact that I wrote for the show. People really like it. What I don't understand is, why did they hire 6'7", 6'8" basketball players and then have them all crouch? Nobody stood up straight. If they wanted to have these tall Sleestack, then they should have had these guys standing up straight. They were always hunched over to make them 3 or 4 inches shorter. See, that's the kind of thing that I just don't understand. It was Saturday morning fare, and I think a lot of kids watched it who were not terribly analytic. They just watched it for the fun, and they grew up with this kind of a nostalgic feeling about the show. They remembered it from their childhood and perhaps sustained some of that enthusiasm and interest, and have imparted it to their offspring, et cetera, et cetera. It certainly didn't require, for the most part, it didn't require anything but sitting back and just sort of, letting it come at you. It didn't. I don't think it required a great deal of cerebration, with the possible exception of my episode.